fifth grade readers. Can you believe we're nearing the end of this book and the end of the school year? I can't believe it. It's crazy to me. Today, we're going to talk about making connections in a text. A connection is anything that you're reading and suddenly you're reminded of something. One example of these kind of connections is a personal connection. That's when you are reading in a book and suddenly you think of something in your own life that you can relate to. For example, maybe you have a new puppy at home and then you were reading a book where the character got a new puppy. That automatically made you think about your puppy. Just then, you made a personal connection to the text. Or maybe you're in track or just really like to run, and so you had a personal connection with Jess Aarons, who also had a goal to be the fastest runner in fifth grade. The second connection that I'd like to talk to you about is called a text-to-text connection. That's when you're reading along and suddenly you read something that makes you think of something that happened in a different book. For example, in Bridge to Terabithia, Leslie Burke made a text-to-text connection when she said the story of the Bible reminded her of the story of Aslan. Aslan is an important character in a book called The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I made a text-to-text connection when, as I read, I realized that Jess and Leslie weren't going to have a relationship that's romantic, which is good. And instead, they were just going to have a really sweet friendship that was special. They helped each other through a lot. So the relationship in Bridge to Terabithia reminded me of the relationship between Harry and Hermione in Harry Potter. And finally, the third connection I want to talk to you about is called text to world. That's when you read something that makes you think about something that is going on in the world. Maybe you saw it on the news, maybe you read it somewhere online, or maybe it's just something you see a lot. I made a text to world connection when I read about bullying happening in Bridge to Terabithia. Every time I read about that, it made me think about bullying that goes on in schools, and it made me think about ways that I can help. So now it's your turn. Time to get a sheet of paper and write down the answers to these questions, or you can submit them directly online on the Google form. Ready? Number 1, explain a personal connection that you've made in the book you're reading. I gave you one example. Now you come up with your own. Number 2, explain a text-to-text connection that you've made with this book. I gave you an example of mine. Now you give me one of your own. And number 3, explain a text-to-world connection that you made in this book. Remember, this can be in any chapter that you've read. For the second half of this lesson, we're going to review figurative language. We've talked about it a lot this year, so this should be just a review for you. First, I'm sure you remember that a simile compares two things using like or as, saying that something is as fast as lightning, or saying that a dancer is like a graceful swan floating across the stage. As though is also another one frequently used. When Jess Aarons was getting really excited and nervous inside, the author writes, "It was as though he had swallowed grasshoppers." Obviously, this had nothing to do with literally eating or swallowing a grasshopper. Do not try this at home, kids. By using that figurative language, the author is able to convey or show that he's nervous and excited to race. The author uses another example of a simile when describing Jess's feelings on Friday when Miss Edmonds was there and he was in the middle of music class. She didn't speak directly to Jess, but she gave him a look with those blue eyes of hers that made him, look at this, zing like one of the strings she was strumming. We can tell that's a positive feeling he has, a zing inside of him, like one of the strings in the music class. It's supposed to convey to the reader that he feels really good. Music is supposed to make you feel alive and excited. Another form of figurative language that authors like to use is a metaphor. Metaphors are just like similes, only they, instead of saying that something is strong like Hercules or pretty as a flower, instead of saying it's like that, the author will say it is that. For example, instead of saying that someone is as beautiful as a flower, they would have said she is a beautiful flower or she is a sparkling diamond. The author uses a metaphor on the first day of school when she writes about Mrs. Myers. Remember the teacher? She yells, "Boys!" Mrs. Myers' face had lost its lemon pie smile. Wait, does that mean she was walking around with a big pie on her face? Obviously not. The author uses that metaphor to help the reader to understand how happy and a big smile, a big bright smile Miss Myers had, not lemon pie on her face. Kids, tell me something. Have you been sitting through this for 1,000 years? No, but if you did say that, you would be using a hyperbole. That's when an author exaggerates in order to convey or show a message. Like if you had said that you've been sitting through this video for 1,000 years, you would be trying to convey to me that this seems to be taking a long time. We also learned when Maybelle was screaming so loud that even if you were deaf in 2 ears, you'd still hear from the back of the bus. Obviously, that's not true. If you're deaf, you cannot hear anything. That's why you take ASL, no matter how much you scream. But the author used that figurative language to convey that Maybelle was really loud. An example of hyperbole as well. Jess's face was burning hot. Was his face on fire? Was it truly burning hot at that extreme of a temperature? No. The author is able to convey to the reader that Jess was feeling, what do you think? Super embarrassed. And he probably did feel hot. When you're embarrassed, do you ever feel like hot in the face? Just not on fire, I hope. There are some other forms of figurative language, and if you want to jog your memory, flip through that section of your skills journal. Then when you're ready, you can answer questions 4, 5, and 6 with one question. Give an example of figurative language used in your text and explain what the author was able to convey or show by using it. So 3 more examples of any figurative language you can find in your book. That's all we've got for today. I'll see you next time for Chapter 9.